A very good evening to all the viewers of the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform where we try and focus on the issues that really matter and return news both to the people and to an older idea of journalism. So many people say, why don't you talk about the things that really count? Well, here on this platform, we try and do exactly that. On the program today, it's been several months since the India-China standoff. Winter is now approaching and there is no sign of any concrete thaw between the two countries. This is despite 7 rounds of talks that have actually taken place. Now, what is going to happen? Is Ladakh headed to be the new Siachen? And by this I mean, are we looking at a permanent state of militarization in the upper reaches of the Himalayas with a new front having opened in addition to all the other fronts that India is already battling? That is the subject of our program today, and let me introduce a very distinguished panel one by one. We're joined by General Atta Hasnain, who has been, of course, the former General Officer Commanding of 15 Corps. We're joined by General D.S. Huda, who has been the former Northern Army Commander. And we're also joined by Ambassador Vivek Karju, who is, of course, a veteran diplomat. And so really, I think you have a great deal of expertise on this program. And I will start with you, General Huda, if I may, to give us a sense of your overall apprehension. We've been talking a lot over the last few months. I did make one trip to Ladakh as well, but of course, media access is very curtailed. Hope to be going again very soon. My question to you would be this. Are we headed for permanent militarization the way it's looking through the winter months? We know that China has amassed 50,000 troops. We know there's an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation that's taking place. Is this, in other words, the new Siachen, sir?
So thank you, Barkha, for having me on your program. So I wouldn't really call it the new Siachen. I think Siachen challenges are much more enormous than they are in eastern Ladakh. But having said that, are we going to see a new, more assertive military posture on the border? We certainly are. Are we going to see more troops on the border? We certainly are. Is that going to be a huge challenge for us? Yes, it will be. From the number of troops that we've had deployed in the past to what we are now seeing, and it looks increasingly likely that major disengagements are not going to take place, and therefore we will have large number of additional forces deployed along the LAC. The other issue, Barkha, is that even though there were troops on both sides in the past, the fact is there were major protocols and agreements that held peace. Now those protocols and agreements have all broken down. So you are certainly looking at a more tense border, even if there is, by some stretch of imagination, some agreement. I still think there will be greater presence of troops because of lack of mistrust on both sides.
So you are saying that, and yet you're saying it's not the new Siachen. So can you explain that? Because of course I'm using Siachen as a metaphor, and what I'm really talking about is a kind of long-term militarization which has taken place because of the deceit of the adversary, in this case China, in that case Pakistan, which prevents, where the trust deficit is so great that India would never trust the adversary enough to actually pull back on troops. So how is that, sir, not the new Siachen? Because you are saying that you are looking at this kind of mass build-up from India's side as well.
So the only reason, Barkha, I said not the new Siachen, because as I said, Siachen is just tremendously different, challenge in terms of, just keeping the troops present in those areas, the logistic challenges, the physical challenges of troops deployed there. But yes, I agree with you principally that there is going to be greater militarization, there is going to be greater tension, there will be additional troops, and their behavior is going to be somewhat different from what we have seen in the past. So in that sense, yes, there will be greater tension, there will be greater militarization.
So let me take this to you, General Hasnain. Greater militarization, greater tension. You have, and I'm going to keep reminding you of this because you have been sanguine, you have been more optimistic than certainly I have been. You have continue to believe that one, the gains that our military has brought to the dialogue table, and two, the fact that China beyond a point would not want conflict will mean that this would remain localized, that this was something that perhaps commanders could settle at their own level. Now, something very interesting has happened. We've had the 14 Corps general change in the middle of all this, right? One, how should we read that? And two, are you still optimistic? We are now looking at November. We are now looking at harsh winter, at sub-zero climbs. We're looking at worse than Kargil. Kargil was short term, it erupted, and that's why I used to compare the standoff to Kargil. I've now started comparing it to Siachen.
Thank you, Barkha. Thank you for having me on your excellent show. And first of all, let me agree entirely with what General Huda just said. I normally tend to believe that I always seem to agree with General Huda. But not having said that, let me go ahead on specifically on your question. If you remember, we discussed this issue about my optimism many times, and I would like to remind you that from the month of May till now, we've really had no violence. We've had a standoff in place, but all the expectations of violence, a possibility of a hot war, skirmishes, nothing has happened as I had predicted, and I predict it will not happen. I was just discussing with Ambassador Kaju a few minutes ago that I anticipate a possibility, a very low percentage possibility, that China may want to go into the winter on a note of moral ascendancy. If I was China, I would perhaps want to do that. A bigger state with a bigger economy, a bigger army, and things like that. And therefore, I would like to deliver a message before winter. A small skirmish here and there, somewhere in the Chushul Bowl or someplace like that, and they will close it there and wait for April next year. That's about the limits I would do in my assessment of a potential skirmish or anything like that at the moment. But having said that, again, I also say I am anticipating this situation will go to April, May next year, and it's all partially due to geopolitics, and it's also due to China looking at the emerging new world order post-COVID. Whenever that happens, there's much more to it, and I don't expect that there is going to be, the standoff is not going to end, of course, but at the same time, I don't believe that there is going to be a degree of violence here.
Now, I do, before I bring in Ambassador Kaju, want to push you a little bit on that. You say there might be a skirmish, that China may be to that extent itching for a fight to sort of, end this phase of this conflict with a dramatic flair, and therefore provoking India. Once, as you know, when you have hundreds of thousands of men eyeball to eyeball, anything can happen. All bets are off. One. Two, what is the definition anymore of a small skirmish? Every skirmish is the life lost of our men. Galwan brought home 20 coffins. So what is a small skirmish? Nothing is acceptable, of course, but I want you to define what you mean by small skirmish.
That's a very difficult task to define that, no doubt. It's a challenge that you have posed, and I will try and do that. I look at it from this angle that the entire spectrum is actually open as far as levels of conflict are concerned. It can go to a very high level, as I said, but it's unlikely completely. And a very low level skirmish, a patrol clash or something like that. You saw the response of the Chinese when the moment we occupied Rezangla, Richenla, and those areas. You found that they came in strength. They tried to sort of dominate us at that time with the show of force, with the kind of a weaponry which we are used to now seeing, what we saw in Galwan and that kind of a thing. It was essentially it goes along with China's whole doctrine, the whole doctrine of psychological warfare, attempting to, establish some kind of an ascendancy on your mind, etc. And I'm only assessing that this may happen just about at the time when winter is coming in, the close of the summer season, and so that this response from our side is unlikely, and the whole thing may not flare out. We've got a change of command. Remember, principally, when a change of command takes place at higher levels, the adversary always seeks opportunities, and this is something. It doesn't worry me. I know General Menon very well, and I know he's very, very capable. But the enemy doesn't know him sufficiently. The adversary doesn't know him sufficiently. And Principally, adversaries tend to look at this kind of a situation. So I won't put my bets on how many guns and how many bullets and how many men will be there, but something could happen. As I said, could happen. It's not necessary that it will happen, but if I was on the other side, I would tend to be a little more offensive at this particular time, not to be taken for granted that I am completely, complacent in my attitude on the line of actual control.
So I'm sure, obviously, our military is wargaming the scenario that you have painted. And I want to talk a little bit about the change in command at the top, but in a moment from now, I want to bring in actually Ambassador Vivek Kaju into this. And with a very interesting question on our screen, where Ankur Krishna says, Ladakh is the new Siachen, though the big difference is that the other side of the border is China and not Pakistan. So how can we have the same rules? I think the question would be asked, maybe, have we underestimated who our real adversary is? Is it much more China than Pakistan, especially when you consider the fact that Pakistan is almost like a vassal state of China in any case?
Strategic threat that we have, and there is no point in denying it. We have tried to contain the Chinese threat through the 1993 and 96 agreements, whereby we thought we'll be able to have a peaceful and tranquil LAC. And these days too, the Ministry of External Affairs, in fact, the Minister of External Affairs has said or has been saying that the entire Indo-China relationship depends on a peaceful and tranquil and stable LAC. But the question is, once the Chinese took the steps that they did in April and May, and have pursued with those steps, then what is the alternative that India has? But to re-examine its entire approach, which began in 1988 and has been pursued by every government since then. Today, the old assumptions are gone, and with the new assumptions have to be put in place. And I often think, and I've in fact written about it, that perhaps we'll have to look at the kind of way the Pakistanis have tried to handle us. We are a larger adversary. Now, what have they done? They've hardened the LOC on their side. Do we harden the LAC? It's going to be costly, but what do? To my mind, now you have no alternative but to harden the LAC. Now, how you harden the LAC is something that the two generals would be much better equipped than I will be to answer. But if that requires stationing of troops on a permanent basis on snowy heights where they weren't there in the past, then I think that the nation will have to do that. The army will have to do that, and the nation will have to bear its expense. Because once trust goes, and trust has gone, then there are certain steps that inevitably follow, and no political leadership can be complacent, and no political leadership can afford a repeat of the army being taken by surprise. In fact, the army itself, I think, would not like to be taken by surprise anymore. So the Chinese have made no bones about it. You see the kind of statements coming out of Beijing, whatever they may say in joint statements, the real statements I go by from, and that is my experience, are the unilateral statements made in the capital. And the actions on the ground. And there, I don't see any softening of the Chinese position.
Yeah. So I think the question you raised about a hardened LAC in addition to a hardened LOC, let me take that straight away to General Huda. Sir, do you share General Hasnain's optimism that you might see a sort of dramatic attempt by China to ratchet up tensions and then withdraw for a while, and then we will inevitably see this quieten down by April? Or do you see this now as a long-term, permanent, here-to-stay sort of situation?
So Barkha, the point being made by Jan Hossain that the Chinese may do something just before the onset of the real winter, sometime in November. I think it's something that the army would be conscious about, and would be taking plans to counter it. I'm sure that is something that is at the back of the mind. Whether it happens or not is not something that we can sit and predict at this stage. As far as a long-term hardening of the LAC is concerned, as I said, Barkha, even if agreements do take place, I think the level of activity along the LAC, the level of forces deployed along the LAC are certainly going to increase. As far as hardening of the LAC is concerned, Barkha, it carries also enormous kinds of risks. See, the LOC is clearly demarcated, it's marked on maps signed by commanders on both sides. Now, the LAC is not marked either on maps or on the ground. So when you start occupying positions which are very close to the LAC, is again a source of tension. So we will have to see how we need to manage the LAC, make sure there are no further intrusions. But I don't think we can apply the same kind of models that are there on the line of control. There it's very clear, Barkha, every inch of ground is very clear. This rock is on the Pakistani side, this rock is on the Indian side. That situation doesn't exist at the LAC, and you could well end up escalating things by trying to occupy, as we've seen in South Bank.
Right. Ambassador Kaju, you wanted to come in, and I'll just add a question of from a viewer. Will the situation worsen for India if Biden wins the elections? How is that going to play out for us? And of course, we know that the Americans have just under the Trump administration named a human rights envoy on Tibet. We are not showing the same aggression, though we well could. But go ahead. You wanted to interject there, and maybe you could take this question as well.
As far as hardening is concerned, I don't foresee a situation where we'll be adventurous or provocative. But certainly, we can't afford a situation, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, of being taken by surprise. The kind of surprise that we were taken by, and let's put it the two generals can contradict me. But in April and May, we were taken by surprise, and the Chinese were able to ingress into areas where we traditionally patrolled. So can we afford that anymore? And that is what I mean by hardening the LAC, that we will have to take steps to prevent that. And if that requires stationing troops at certain points, so be it. Okay. But I doubt whether any government anymore will be able to look the nation in the eye and say that after the April-May incidents, we still believed in Chinese intention. Second, is as far as the Biden thing is concerned, my own assessment is this, that Biden may adopt a different tactical approach, to an extent even a different strategic approach. But the objective of containing China will remain. And in the pursuit of that objective, a certain reliance on India is essential for the Americans. That will not change. Now, it depends on how we play this game and how the Americans play this game. But the basic trend, I think, has bipartisan support in America of befriending India, of building up India. It depends on us how we wish to play this. I personally think, I'll just add this sentence, I personally think that a closer relationship with America does not imply a subordinate relationship to America. There are areas where we won't play the American game. If the Americans have appointed an envoy on Tibet, it does not necessarily follow that we'll do the same thing. In fact, I'm surprised, and if I may add, I'm surprised as a former diplomat of the kind of steps that the American administration is continuing to take even weeks before the elections. I mean, there's talk of 2+2 meetings.
But there is a view that India needs to go much more aggressive on Tibet, not to ape the Americans, but that, for too long we haven't, exactly adjusted to the one China game. We continue to recognize Taiwan. We haven't gone aggressive on Tibet.
No.
So it's not about aping the Americans. It's also about changing the game because China has changed its game.
No, please. What I meant was aping the Americans specifically on the steps they've taken.
Right.
I don't think, by the way, I don't think we've recognized Taiwan. We have an office, a trade office in Taiwan, but we don't recognize it as a sovereign country. So
Yeah.
that may be a technical point, but it's as far as Tibet is concerned. Last point, as far as Tibet is concerned, the very fact that we host the Dalai Lama, there is a government in exile. Whatever be the formal position, there is a government in exile. So what does that indicate? It indicates a certain strong and a continuing strong position, even if it is not asserted, but a continuing strong position as far as Tibet is concerned.
Okay, let me now bring in General Hasnain, and there are also a lot of questions coming in, but I'll just get General Hasnain to respond first to everything he's heard General Huda and Ambassador Kaju say, and then he can respond. Go ahead, sir.
On the views expressed by General Huda and General Kaju, well, I really hardly have any difference on it. But I would go a step further on the aspect what Mr. Kaju was saying. The expectations that people have about the government of India to, ratchet up its policy on Tibet, on Taiwan, and things like that. I think India is just being careful and nothing else. I think a lot of statements are emerging unofficially. There's a lot of things happening in the Indian media. Similar tactics, which is followed by the Chinese many times, what they want to speak, they speak through Global Times, which is not necessarily always official. But in our case, I think the public view is being projected. A lot of discussion on Tibet, a lot of discussion on Taiwan is taking place from time to time. And I think the government, to my mind, is playing it correctly so far. They're not going over the hill. They're not trying to be over offensive. They're trying to give peace a chance. And hoping that the talks which are on at different levels, and of course, we are also approaching, if you remember, we are also approaching the SCO summit, where Mr. Modi is likely to meet Mr. Xi Jinping. So the environment for that from our side is definitely being created in a better way. From Mr. Xi Jinping, no doubt, there are no expectations. I have no expectations. He goes to a marine base, a Chinese marine base, and starts speaking about preparations for war against India. Well, that is also expected from the Chinese. I don't expect that situation to happen.
General Hasnain, there's a question, if you can quickly take it, and then I'll go to General Huda. Should India then engage more with Taiwan, reach out to Vietnam, Japan, Australia, form an international conglomerate to contain the Chinese aggression?
Well, absolutely no two opinion about it. Absolutely, we should be doing that. We should be engaging with Taiwan, definitely, as much as possible, sending home the message to the Chinese that too can play this game. And if they are doing it with Pakistan, we can do it with Taiwan on the other side. We need not be, we need to be a little sensitive about certain issues. Like Tibet is a very sensitive issue. We need not go whole hog on Tibet, but on issues with the relationship with Japan, the relationship with Australia, Quad itself, you've seen what has happened with Quad, a trilateral kind of a thing with Japan, the United States, India. All this is going to send enough messages to China that India has, as far as foreign policy is concerned, is got it all going.
So, General Huda, the perception that that India is much weaker militarily. This is something that you hear a lot, right? That there is an asymmetry in terms of power, in terms of resources. How do we actually respond to this? And I brought this up because there was actually a specific question that came up, and I'll just read it out to you. Mukesh Panekar saying India is militarily weaker than China, not just in technology but also in aggression. And I know all of us would disagree. I know that one of the things that changed the game on the dialogue table is the Indian military actually not playing defensive and playing offensive and claiming those heights. But the question goes on to say China is ready. It will not stop at any limits. It doesn't have a sense of boundary. I think that's what really the viewer is trying to ask, and that's why you're dealing with this deceit in a sense to begin with. General Huda, if you'll take that.
Yeah, Barkha. So actually on paper, if you look at, as they say, the balance of military forces and just do number counting, numbers of aircraft and submarines and, tanks and soldiers, you will probably find that, China compares numerically, much more favorable than India. But also let's look at the threats that China faces. The focus is towards the South China Sea, the main adversaries, the US, etc. I think the larger point as far as India and China are concerned is please look at the ground and the terrain. Launching massive attacks across the Himalayan watershed is extremely, extremely difficult. And over the years, the Indian Army has built fairly strong military defenses along the LAC. Also, we know that as far as the Air Force is concerned, there are considerable advantages that we have because aircraft take off from the planes with full weapon loads, etc.
Yeah.
The Indian Navy has a tremendous advantage in the Indian Ocean. So I think when you factor in all these aspects, you will find that the Indian military compared quite favorably as far as the Chinese are concerned. Primarily, it's because of application of forces and the difficulties that are there. On the technology front, Barkha, I think that's one area we need to be very, very careful and look at that. I think in terms of military technology, China has advanced, by great leaps and bounds. Their civil military fusion and technology, their investment in, robotics, artificial intelligence, etc. And that could actually surprise us, with how future wars are going to be fought. So that's one area I think where the Indian military also, Indian Army needs to invest much more than it has done. But I think man to man in terms of training, in terms of equipment, in terms of our deployment, I think we shouldn't be that worried that, the Chinese will come and they'll sort of overrun us.
Yeah. There's also this question, I'll take it to Ambassador Karju, about the affordability of war. This is something you hear all the time. There have also even been other diplomats like Ambassador Nirupama Rao, who actually said to me that, given the political popularity that the Modi government enjoys, maybe this conflict can be converted into a permanent settlement. So we have a question here from Asha: can India and China afford a war? This is the middle of the COVID pandemic. If war is inevitable, will it lead to another 1962? One of the things that I heard on the ground repeatedly, especially from former soldiers of the Ladakh Scouts and many Ladakhi volunteers, was one thing that has changed is that this is not the India of 1962. And I just picked up this question deliberately so that I could say that. But I'm sure, sir, you'd want to add to that. Ambassador Karju, please go ahead.
Let me mention the elephant in the room, which no one talks about, but I have perhaps been a little adventurous and written about it. It's not a question of affordability of war in COVID-62, but what we forget is that India and China are both nuclear states. Can nuclear states afford a war? In fact, I've argued that China's behavior since April and May especially has been irresponsible. It is not as a power which aspires to be in the same bracket, if not replace the Americans as the preeminent power in the world. It has really and virtually come in the same bracket as Pakistan, whom you rightly called its vassal state. Now let me explain. The Pakistanis have nuclear weapons and they sponsor terrorism, thereby provoking us, showing complete irresponsibility. I believe the Chinese actions on the ground along the LAC and the intrusions that they made are also provocative. And the one lesson that we have from the Cold War is that nuclear states do not provoke each other either on each other's territories or on the territories controlled by them. And therefore, it is not a question of COVID-19. The Chinese should be aware that there are lines. We don't, unlike the Pakistanis, we don't mention all this. But nuclear states have lines, and those lines can't be crossed. So the big difference between 1962 and now is that both India and China, unlike 1962, have nuclear weapons. And nuclear states don't fight wars. Yes, the Americans and the Soviets fought wars in Vietnam, but proxy wars in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, etc. But never did they provoke each other in this manner as the Chinese and the Pakistanis have done. And that is why, since we don't say it, it's the elephant in the room, and it's time that some of us say it. The system might not say it, but some of us have to say it.
So let me apply to General Hasnain, who's wanted to come in, the language that we use in India, Pakistan, conflict below the nuclear threshold, right? That used to be the template that defined India and Pakistan for very long. Then Balakot happens, and there's a whole debate in this country over whether that paradigm has actually moved. Now, Ambassador Kaju puts that paradigm back on the table in the context of another country, China. Are we then going to have the old Pakistan template here about conflict below the nuclear threshold with China, General Hasnain?
See, Barkha, I've been listening very avidly to what Ambassador Kaju just said. And I would like to introduce something else into this because I honestly feel, and I've written a lot about it, that after assessing for the last 4 5 months what is China's intent, which is what everyone sitting in government today is doing. What is China's intent in doing all this? I strongly felt that the strategic confidence being displayed by what you call the new India is so high at the moment in the last 3 4 years. It has worried a lot of people in China. It has worried a lot of people in Pakistan. This seems to be a collusive effort primarily to pressurize you. It's not war. It's not going to lead to war. It is what I have always said. It is a hybrid situation where they will use limited coercion on the line of actual control, but have control over many other things. The aspects of fifth generation war, attempting to carry out gray zone warfare, interfere in the political environment of India, interfere perhaps in the northeastern insurgencies, try and evoke that kind of a thing which used to exist in the 60s earlier. These are the kind of things to try and push India back into a shell. Because I strongly feel that the kind of activities that have been displayed in the last 3 4 years seem to project that India, and particularly these statements about taking back Gilgit-Baltistan, taking back Pakistan occupied Kashmir, all these have definitely added oodles to India's confidence. But it has also added a lot of concern to China, and the Chinese are attempting to do exactly that to us at the moment. Therefore, the nuclear threshold will not be crossed in a hybrid war. This is the situation they are choosing deliberately.
Yeah, but General Huda, there is a saying called war by other means, right? There is war by other means. And we've seen that with Pakistan through terrorism. We have seen that with China through its incursions in the Ladakh province, with its build-up along the border. Now India started doing the same. We've built dozens of bridges. 8 of them are in the Ladakh province. So in a sense, this might be a new kind of war, a new kind of conflict. Maybe the word I should use more responsibly is conflict. But there can be conflict and war by other means, by other names.
Sure, Barkha, as I think also General Hasnain has pointed out, there is a blurring of lines between what is war and what is peace. And particularly in areas like cyber and information warfare. And you find, countries prosecuting these even during peacetime. And we know that China has extremely good information and cyber capability. And I don't think, they'll hesitate to use. They've been doing it with the United States. So I see no reason why they will not do it against India, when push comes to shove. You will certainly see that, as General Hasnain is pointing out, during election period. One more point which he made, and I think which is important, is support to Northeast insurgencies. Barkha, we tend to feel that, last 20, 30 years, Chinese have not supported Northeast insurgencies. I was a division commander in Manipur. We had credible information. It was absolutely credible that Manipur insurgent groups, the Naga insurgent groups, were traveling to China. They were meeting not very high-level officials, low-level officials. And the Chinese were telling them that you need to get your act together. You are too many groups, come together. There was talk about supply of arms. I am talking of 2010. So they have kept their contacts alive, Barkha. And I think we should not take our eye off Northeast. It could well be, the Chinese doing something. And we know what Arunachal is all about as far as China is concerned. So certainly we will see more and more of, gray zone warfare, hybrid warfare coming from China. And of course, I don't see tensions along the LAC, easing down at least in the next few months.
Yeah. That's an important point about the Northeast, and maybe that's where China will try its hand before, as General Hasnain believes, coming back to the dialogue table sometime in April. Ambassador Kaju, there's a question on where Russia is in this whole game, and I think that's an interesting question from Utkarsh. What role will Russia play if there is actually war or conflict between India and China? You've said something about the Americans. Where is Russia in this game?
I think the Russian interest, as was displayed during the SCO foreign ministers meeting, is to do their best to try to prevent any escalation of conflict and douse conflict such as it is, or tensions between India and China, because their nightmare situation is open hostilities, armed hostilities between India and China. If and should those hostilities break out, I tend to think that they'll try to steer more or less a neutral course, because they will be in a difficult because their global situation requires a closer embrace of the Chinese, but the India relationship is exceedingly significant for the Americans. So therefore, I believe that they will try to steer more or less a neutral course.
Okay, I have about 5 minutes left and I want to take final comments. But one thing we didn't discuss, we touched upon it, was the change in command at 14 Corps. And I just want General Hasnain to come in on that. Now, in itself, individual should not matter. General officer commanding is a GOC. But the timing, there is going to be a speculation on why this happened, what's the messaging, what are we trying to say? So if you will come in on that.
Thank you, Barkha. That's a very interesting aspect. Incidentally, I was one of the few people who visited General Harinder, perhaps one of the last people before the COVID really broke out. 17th, 18th of March, I was in Leh, and I had a discussion with General Harinder at that time, found him full of confidence. I knew him for many years before. I knew he was professionally very sound, having been in Kashmir extensively himself. So what is being read today that his posting out as commandant of IMA seems to be some kind of a commentary on his performance is to my mind completely hogwash, for the simple reason that he has completed 1 year. And the Indian Army, and I'm a former military secretary of the Indian Army, I can tell you this, the Indian Army believes in its 1 year tenure for corps commanders. Okay, 14 Corps is special at this particular time because it's got a situation going on its frontiers, and therefore perhaps the government could have delayed this to 3, 4, 5 months. But you've got someone ready, available. The pre-winter situation is the best time when you need to change over so that he eases himself into the winter. And General Menon, who's been selected, himself has been an ex-BGS of the 14 Corps, and everyone understands what a Brigadier General Staff is. He's the man who controls the whole Corps. Even the Corps commander doesn't know how much the BGS normally knows. So I think this is a perfectly sane decision to ease out the previous Corps commander, bring in the new Corps commander. A very good situation. He's commanded a division in the Northeast. He has extensively been a part of various groups which have negotiated with the Chinese earlier. So he has got all that experience with him. So I would not put too much to it. Unfortunately, there is too much speculation going on that why at such a time as the Corps commander been suddenly posted out. I would like to assuage feelings. It's happened just simply because it needs to happen at this time. A posting order has to be issued out after 1 year. If you delay the postings of Corps commanders, you will find there'll be a line of people waiting to be promoted.
Okay, we'll take your word for it. I'm not sure the last word on this has been spoken. This will continue to be debated. I think the more important question is where does the government go from here? You've seen a very cautious statement, Ambassador Kaju. Quick last word to you and General Huda from the Foreign Minister today, Mr. Jaishankar. How did you read those comments?
I have felt that the government needs to share more information with the people. If they are not in a position to do that, and I can perfectly understand that when sensitive negotiations are going on, then you don't want the glare of intense publicity on it. But if this is not possible, then at least sections of the political class should be taken in confidence, So that's one aspect. Second, I'll go back to my basic proposition that the old policy is broken down, and we've got to apply our minds, not only the government, but as a nation, of how we go forward with China, because that is our principal strategic sort of adversary. Let's mince no words there.
Yeah. General Huda, I'll give you the last word. I have to close then. What would you advise?
Yeah, Barkha, so very briefly, I think we have to take the long view. All this little bit of pussyfooting that was happening because we were thinking things will, work out fine. Let's temper our language, etc. On the issues of Quad, etc., which everybody has brought out. I think we have to now take a long view. And as Ambassador Katu said, just relook, the whole range of bilateral arrangements, bilateral dialogue, and I dare say, let's look at alliances now, whether they are military alliances or diplomatic alliances. I think because as we go in the future, Barkha, we are only going to get China becoming more assertive. They're going to become more powerful militarily, economically, and therefore for us to, fight this strategic rival, we have to take a completely new approach.
There's just one question, if anybody wants to take it, an audience question. Can there be any face saver for both parties? Something that will help both people walk away from this saying, we've both made our point and and the territorial integrity of India has been upheld. Ambassador Kaju, you want to take that quickly?
Well, I, for one, am convinced that we've got to be assertive on China going back to status quo.
Right.
That to my mind is non-negotiable.
Okay, General Hussain, quickly, 10 seconds if you want to add to that.
I would say I would agree with Ambassador Kaju completely. I may not have expectations from the meeting at the SCO summit, but I do think some kind of a trigger may just about come about from there, and that could be a face saver by itself.
Why do you feel that, General Hussain?
Well, knowing Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping, they've had a very good relationship. I agree, for the last 6 months they haven't spoken to each other, but this is perhaps a gut feeling more than anything else, which I feel that a meeting in a different country, come together, having understood what the dynamics of this whole standoff have been, may just trigger off a situation where both sides may decide to withdraw.
I'm just smiling because I love your optimism. You just always remain optimistic. Yes, Ambassador Kaju, I've got to go.
What does Atta mean by saying both sides need to withdraw? We withdraw from where?
No, not withdraw.
That's exactly
withdraw from the situation. Not withdraw from Ladakh, from Eastern Ladakh.
Both sides do what?
Standoff situation. That is essentially both stand down. Let's not withdraw.
No. This needs greater clarity. This needs greater clarity.
A standoff.
Are you saying that the heights we've occupied within our perception of the LAC? Then what does withdraw from the standoff actually mean?
I know that's a very complex situation. That if you talk about status quo ante, also means like a diplomat.
No, I thought you were talking like a diplomat.
I am only expressing a feeling that perhaps better sense may prevail somewhere when the top leaders of the two countries meet.
Were you wanting to say something? So
sorry. Something may get triggered.
Yes, sorry.
Very briefly, what I want to say is that as of now, the way both sides have enunciated their positions, I don't see a face saver. There is going to be somebody who's going to say I'm a winner and somebody loser if there is an agreement. Otherwise, this deadlock is going to continue. I don't see any face saver at this stage.
That's the grim note we have to end on. And please take a moment to think about our soldiers. It's harsh winter on set. Take a moment to think about those men in uniform who are serving on those icy climbs. I hope you are wrong, General Huda, only for the reason that I do not want young men in their 20s to actually have to live that kind of winter. But that was the question we left you with today. Is Ladakh heading to be the new Siachen? And if there isn't some sort of breakthrough, we could be looking at a permanent militarization in that area. So to that extent, I hope General Hasnain's optimism wins the day, even though Ambassador Karju has a quarrel or two with it. I'll say thank you. I'll say thank you, gentlemen, and thank you to our audience. You've all been a very engaged, informed audience. It's been a pleasure talking to you all. I will be back in 20 minutes from now with Sajjad Lone in his first on-camera interview since his release. So there's a lot coming up on the channel for our viewers. In the meantime, thank you, General General Hasnain, and Ambassador Karju. Thank you for watching.